Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark, so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. Genesis chapter 7, verse 17. For thousands of years, people who knew the story of Noah believed it word for word. But in the last century or so, more and more people believe that this is just a story, a biblical myth. So would it surprise you if I tell you that modern archaeology seems to confirm that there was indeed a great flood? Hello, and welcome to History in 7 Facts. The story of Noah can be found in the very first book of the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible, and also in the Quran. According to these stories, God became angry of humanity, who were plunged in depravity and sin. So he flooded the earth with so much water that it took 150 days for it to retreat. All animals and people drowned, except Noah, his family, and one pair of each animal species that found refuge in his ark. But could this have really happened? Well, the idea that one man and his 3 sons could have built a giant ship on their own thousands of years ago is very, very unlikely. So is the part where they gathered a pair of each animal species, put them into the ark, and fed them for half a year. Not to mention the fact that Noah was at this time 600 years old and lived an additional 350 years after the flood. Understandably, not many people today believe such things to be true. But does that mean that there's really no truth to this story? Or is it based on an actual event that was retold countless times, with each generation adding a legendary detail? The fact of the matter is that there are more than 200 legends spread all over the world about the Great Flood. One of the oldest can be found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the famous Sumerian story about the king of Uruk, written some 4,000 years ago. In it, there's a chapter about how Gilgamesh was warned by a god to build an ark to save all the creatures of earth because a great flood is coming. In another Sumerian version, that might have even older origins, found on the so-called Nippur tablet, the god Enlil decides to wipe out humanity. The kind god Enki warns King Astrahasis about the flood, who builds an ark made of reeds and bitumen and gathered all animals and birds in it. Such stories don't only come from ancient Mesopotamia, but from literally all over the world, from China to America and even Polynesia and Hawaii. But why? The simplest and most logical explanation of these myths is that they are based on real catastrophic but local events that throughout the centuries were exaggerated. Thus, local floods became global calamities that had a meaning. The gods were angry. Viewed in this light, Noah's story is no longer preposterous. But in this case, the flood was not a regular one. This might have been the largest flood humans have ever witnessed. Such an event could have easily fooled the locals to believe that the entire earth is drowned in water. And scientists today believe they know the exact location and date of this catastrophic event. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you one thing. This channel has no sponsors, so if you enjoy the content I make, please consider supporting these videos by becoming a patron. You can check out my Patreon page by clicking here or find the link in the description. Okay, now we can move on to the next fact. For decades, archaeologists were looking for clues in the wrong spot. Mount Ararat, found in the extreme east of modern-day Turkey, where the Bible says Noah's Ark landed when the waters retreated. However, those clues were actually laying to the northwest at the Black Sea. In fact, the Black Sea itself might be the clue researchers were looking for. To understand what I'm talking about, we have to go further back in time. 12,000 years ago, the last ice age was coming to an end. As the earth was getting warmer, glaciers started to melt and their waters formed new freshwater lakes. One of those lakes was the precursor of the Black Sea. That lake slowly grew in size and attracted lots of people on its shores. But here's the thing, this lake and all of the settlements around it were 150 meters below the Mediterranean Sea's level. Centuries passed, then millennia, and the Earth was still getting warmer. Glaciers from all around the world melted, and this led to a global increase of the sea level. Then, approximately 7,500 years ago, an event so catastrophic and frightening occurred that indeed any witness could have drawn only one conclusion: the gods were indeed angry and decided to drown the earth. So what happened? Look at this modern map of the Mediterranean. Look closely at this region, right between Turkey and Greece. This is the Aegean Sea. This sea is funneled to the northeast to an entering called today the Marmara Sea, which connects it to the Black Sea. This is where a catastrophe that's hard to imagine occurred 7,500 years ago. Back then, between the Marmara Sea and the depression where a large freshwater lake stood, there was a thin ridge of dry land. This was all that stood between the growing Mediterranean Sea and the lowlands on the other side. Pushed by the mass of the entire Mediterranean, this small dam eventually collapsed and the Bosphorus Strait was born. It probably started as an innocent stream that turned into a raging torrent, the likes of which no one had ever seen. Try to imagine the Niagara Falls, only the water flow was 200 times larger. That's the force that created the Black Sea. Through this breach, 42 cubic kilometers of seawater entered the depression every day. This gigantic flood likely changed the region's microclimate too, and heavy clouds formed which generated torrential rains in the entire region. This probably made people think that the rains were the cause of the flood, just like in Noah's story. The settlements on the shore of the former freshwater lake were now quickly disappearing under the salty waters of the Mediterranean. Huge swaths of land around modern-day Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, Russia and Georgia were soon to be covered by water. Those who lived on the shore had to get away, and fast. Anyone that couldn't travel at least 1 kilometer per day was doomed. Some might have built themselves simple rafts and boats, thinking the flooding would not stop. If they did, they likely tried to save not just their families, but also a part of their animals. And who knows, maybe one of those people was indeed a guy named Noah. William Ryan and Walter Pittman of the Columbia University in New York were the ones who came up with this theory in 1993. To support it, they analyzed sediments and seashells brought up from the seabed of the northern Black Sea region. They found that every freshwater shell remains they found was older than the oldest seashells, meaning that the Black Sea was absolutely a freshwater lake that was rapidly replaced by saltwater. Carbon dating of these remains also showed that all of these beings died at the same time. All of this evidence points to one major event that rapidly changed the entire region. It seems that the theory is correct. There was just one more thing missing. If indeed the Black Sea formed so rapidly and not so long ago, the old shores should still be largely intact as they didn't have time to erode away. And wouldn't you know it, the old shores are indeed in place. In 1999, famous explorer Robert Ballard led an expedition to the Black Sea. Using sonar and underwater cameras, they found an ancient shoreline at a depth of 167 meters, about 32 kilometers from Turkey's coast. There are beaches, promontories, sandbanks, and the same mollusk shells found by the American scientists in the northern parts of the sea. It seems that the Great Flood was real. So why do we believe that this gigantic flood was the source of Noah's story? Well, we'll never know for sure, but there is strong evidence to suggest that the formation of the Black Sea is indeed the origin of the legend. This catastrophe occurred in the correct macro region and was sufficiently apocalyptic to convince witnesses and later storytellers that this was a global event. Even today, if such an event would occur, you would also believe that the end of the world just came. and the people of the time couldn't have explained it the way we can today, so it's really not surprising that they blamed it on the gods. In any case, this is not an event one forgets. It took another 3,000 years until writing was invented, and during this time it's not likely that people just forgot about this catastrophe. During this time, the story was told and retold, adding legendary elements to it, and in such a long time, it definitely had the time to spread throughout the entire Middle East, all the way to Samaria and beyond. By the time it was first written down, the story changed so much that the myths and legends simply drowned the real parts of it. But regardless of the legends, the evidence remained, and it now proves that a great flood indeed occurred thousands and thousands of years ago. I hope this video was interesting enough to have inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe. You can leave your comments downstairs, and you can also check out my Patreon page if you want to support me. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.